players, hello Gravitrons, I'm more gravity. Let's play chess. I won this game about 3 minutes ago, 2 or 3 minutes ago. I had the white pieces. I'm glad to report that it was a very accurate game, with accuracy and from 81 to under 90. It was also a lengthy game. I believe my opponent and I finished play on the 64th move. Yes, Queen's Gambit decline. This is very classical, well-known stuff. Knights are usually out early in the Queen's Gambit, exceptions being maybe Black Star Squared Bishop, as my opponent shows here. And Queen A4 just requires a accurate response early by way of, for instance, pawn to c6, but the threat behind Queen A4 is Queen takes b4. So it's not, things are even, but Black has to find the correct response. I'm pretty sure that Knight c6 is the only good response here. Let's take a look. Yeah, Knight c6 is close to even, and the next best move for Black leads White ahead almost a full rook. So requiring your opponent to respond accurately. That's how mistakes get made by your opponent. But my opponent found Knight c6 and is protecting b4, so Black will not lose a piece anytime soon unless there's an error in addition to the position, not in addition to another error. Knight to e5. I'm going a little bit early, but strongly against c6, with a continued or renewed threat against against the Black bishop at b4. I think this is wise. This is a practical, strong move to dump that bishop. From my opponent's perspective, he's either studied this, has enough time to refute it, or finds a good move that answers the threat anyway. And this is bishop takes c3 in this instance. Recapture with the pawn, and White's doing slightly better. Not a lot better, just slightly better. Fans of the Office television series will hear the echoes of Jim's assessment of how much manure there would be on their wedding day. There's another word for it when people go honeymoon. How much manure there would be on their honeymoon? I always thought there would be manure, right? Or sarcasm, but I always thought there would be manure, but not quite this much manure. It's more about cadence and rhythm that connects those two things than anything on the chessboard. So, well, I suppose the Knights could be making quite a bit of that. So, hey, that's another idea. That's also an idea. I played Queen b3 here. I'm going to step out of the discovered attacks against my queen, and this is after I decided not to capture the bishop on d7 directly. I think the queen's better placed on b4 than to give up a really awesome knight whose capture earns White another tempo, because this knight's got to move, and where the heck is he gonna move, and all kinds of stuff. So I played queen to b3 here. I think it's at least practical. Pawn takes c4, so then the queen jets off in this direction, allowing the c4 pawn to remain vulnerable, but capturing a more easily defended and more easily strengthened pawn on b7. What do I mean by that? I could capture on c4 and have this pawn, but this pawn's going down anyway, guys. The pawn on c4 is going down one way or the other. The pawn on b7, I mean, if Black's given another move, b6, and that's it. There's no more threat along the b file. I don't own the file. I don't have the b pawn, and I'm not attacking pieces, albeit pieces that are already defended, and yeah, it's not quite as good for white in that case. So I played queen b7, queen takes b7, with the idea that the c4 pawn will fall soon. Rook to b8, knight takes c6. So I calculated this correctly. This is the best move. After the queens swap in this strange way, it requires black to move his, her, or they king. I was just judging the gender of my opponent. I try to use the appropriate gender when something makes that obvious. My opponent's avatar and name don't, so I'll use his, her, or they. And you know what happened though? I was talking about the king, and I started to say queen, probably because of balancing the merits of speaking one gender or another. These things do happen in psychology. So the king captures on d8, and so it's the only good move. It's the only way to do it for black. It's gonna either that or it'll be down a lot of material. But forcing the king to move early, or in this case almost early, is sometimes a strength in and of itself. We notice it just jarbles things around. This rook has a more difficult time getting into the game. There's moves like bishop to g5 to pin the knight at f6, and that actually looks pretty good, because if the game settles down into a rook and pawn endgame or a king and pawn endgame, then doubling pawns on f6 could be valuable. So I stand by. This goes back to pretty much knight takes b6. I stand by knight takes b6. I think it's the best move on the board. Bishop to g5. The computer doesn't realize right away if this is such a great move. Sure that the knight is pinned and everything, but the idea is, well, maybe the computer's got something. The king moves to e7, and we can't ensure a doubling of pawns on the e file. Yeah, no, I'd say Torch 4 has a good assertion here. King to e7 is strong. So with that in mind, I went after the knight. Instead of looking for doubling the pawns, I'm gonna try to capture the knight with a pawn. As long as this pin stands, then the e pawn might be able to get to a position to capture on f6. And if my opponent wants to block that with e5, then the d pawn might get to a position where she can capture on f6. I use both genders for pawn, figure out why. Now, king back to f8. It just seems like black is wasting moves almost. Doesn't want to lose the knight, so that definitely makes sense. And it seems perhaps the engine wants him to move to e8 rather, to e8 here. The engine figures h6, and then second best is distant with king e8. So yeah, h6 just kicks the bishop. All right, kicks the bishop. If it's asking the question of the bishop, and the bishop goes to h4, then perhaps g5 will kick the bishop further. There's no worry to loosen these kingside pawns. The king is stuck in the middle here. He can't castle. There's no worry about that. And it kicks my bishop to g3 with tempo. Importantly, then I don't gain much in the center. So I really like this move suggestion by Torch 4. Pawn to h6. Short of that, white's doing quite well. For instance, after king to f8, we trade on f6, which I think was at least good enough. Maybe there was better. I'm not concerned with f3 might have solidified things a little bit before all that, but I'm glad to get the doubled pawns on the f-file. My opponent's pawn structure is in shambles. This also is nice. We have bishops of the same color, which is a more decisive. It leads to more decisive endgames than bishops of opposite color. But the main thing here for me is doubled pawns. doubled pawns. Isolani. Isolani. The pawn on e6 is actually either healthy as a pawn to push or can become part of this healthy idea on e and f. It can become maybe these pawns. Sometimes we look at a structure like this and say strong. No, all black has to do to get there is play f5. It's not going to work here because f5, e takes f5, yes, even away from the center, and e takes f5, and these pawns are now horribly doubled. So black's pawn structure is in complete shambles right now. Not only that, but bishop takes c4 is available right there for capture. So white's doing well. That's all. This just white's doing well here. The bishop trade helps white, I think. Not, I mean, maybe not at the moment, but overall, I mean, white's doing well in this position. I missed something here, and I had thought about rook to b1. Probably rook. Let's take a look here. I mean, there can't be anything too bad with rook at f to b1. We're going to attack the bishop a second time, and we leave intact the rook that can support a4, and this bishop might be in serious trouble. Let's try this out on the practice. The way to practice against computers, white to move, and I'm going to choose to play rook f to b1. Best move. I'm glad for that. And now getting into things with a4, and it looks like I want to do this first. Okay. Now this is a moment when you transition into a bishops of same color endgame. You want to take a moment to decide where your bishop's gonna go, if you have such a moment. For instance, I'm noticing that I have an extra pawn. However, each side has about the same number of pawns on light squares or pawns on dark squares. And we might want to consider a move like bishop to f5, but you'll find this one-off attack. The opponent can play to h6, not even all the way to h5, but the pawn's now out of the way, and at a moment's notice, the king is always there to protect it. So why then bishop to f5? It doesn't really help black. Definitely doesn't help black. Maybe it does actually a little bit, but bishop f5 doesn't help white on the queen side. So I'm skeptical about that move in particular. But we want the bishop near e4 to help protect e4 when there are assailants relatively close compared to some of the other pawns. So if f5's out, then I'm thinking bishop to d5. If pawn to c6, then okay, my bishop is getting kicked, but look at the position black is putting his own bishop into, where now black's light square bishop is blocked in numerous ways. Then we also want to consider, how about just pushing a pawn while we can, but then we cede a dark square to one of black's pawns for a long term and commit the light squared pawn to c4 for a long term, and that's going to hinder White's bishop's movement. So far I'm liking bishop d5. Maybe we just saw that c6 kind of kicks this bishop a bit. I think he might be fine at c4. Black gets another dark square out of the deal. But then bishop d3 keeps the e4 pawn in a good way. No, this is beyond. We don't need this. This is too much. Something about this is too much. How about f4? Okay. Well, the computer tells us that that isn't so great, and seeing the resulting move a5, I'm inclined to agree. I wanted f4 to help my king become involved. Okay. The computer evaluates this position as better for white. I think we might be over-evaluating the extra pawn. We have to take into account that black's pawns are much better situated. Before I told you how they were weak, and so weak. Well, black has found a way that even with 4 Isolani pawns, white's got his pawns on the same color square as his bishop. Black has, I believe, the only the only passed pawn on the board and can move at a moment's notice to be protected, while being then the only protected passed pawn on the board. We go back. As early as here that we have to take better action. Perhaps the importance of stopping these connected pawns by keeping our pawns on f and e, and also capturing the passed pawn on a6 should be prioritized. Cut black's bishop out a bit from the game by playing this move. Okay, my friends, this is a little bit far afield. This is how the game went. We traded bishops on b5, rooks on b1, and then white was in a much better position to pick off pawns on the queen side with a superiorly placed rook guarding the only open file of the game. And black chose to defend a7. That's fine. It's one of the pawns to defend. The other one falls on c7. White now has 2 extra pawns, and as we see, black's threats don't really materialize all that well. Even with excellent or best play, it seems like the momentum is just always going towards white now, with 3 pawns to the better, and protecting the 2 weakest, protecting the 1, 2, 3 weakest pawns on the board quite well. After black plays f5, black now has double pawns on the f file, and we start to get some firepower rolling, picking up pawns where we can just simplify things into something completely one. We want to cut off black's king from the king side, and then calculate ways we can make our pawns go upward to closer to promotion. Gonna keep as many of these pawns protected as we can. I like king g3 here, keeping control over all these pawns which are very important to us, but also kicking the rook in the process to earn a tempo. It's particularly useful right now because black's king can't proceed to the 5th rank. So in many times, I don't recall if I played it or not, but many times white will follow up with rook to a6, and black's king has to go all the way back to the 7th rank. Isn't that gonna give these pawns a moment, meaning a move or another move to ascend towards promotion? Black's rook has to move, and that's fine. We can do this with pawn to g5 is fine with check, because if black wants to occupy f5 to be sort of in the middle of things here, then white will play rook a5 check, and this is becoming very overwhelming in white's favor. So I'm glad I made the move pawn to g5 there. My opponent remains stubborn. King to g6. I don't know if my opponent is stubborn, but his play evidences stubborn defense, and I'm going to give a similar check anyway. The king comes into the to this sort of area here. I don't really want to say it. And white has now the option to play rook a5 check and proceed from there, or just be glad to get the move g6 going. The pawn is at g6, well protected. So that's what I played. g6 is strong. Rook to c3. We want to keep close enough that we might protect h2 if necessary. It might not be necessary, right? Rook to g4, or sorry, king to h4, rook to c2, pawn to g7, and if now rook takes h2 check, the king has the open g3 square. It's not, and only way to try to, there's no way to stop the pawn now, right? Because the rook would go to h8 where the pawn would capture and promote in the same move. Or otherwise the squares to attack g7 are under control by white's king. Or at h7 to attack g7 are too slow, as the pawn then promotes. Yeah, so anyway, this is behind the move pawn to g6. Rook c3 check, and we're going to move up board like we saw. Instead of any of these attempts to capture g6, my opponent makes a better move. King takes f4. That's one fewer pawns on the board, and if she or they can get it, rook to c8 and then rook to h8 is, in current configuration of white pieces, checkmate. So realizing that g6 both threatens promotion and controls the h8 square from this attempt to checkmate here, and all this kind of stuff, the rook would be lost on h3, the rook will be lost on g2 with check even. It looks like white is going to be able to promote the pawn. This line is better than the ones I was showing you. This is best line I believe, and the black king and rook are actually together threatening to capture on g7. Then the white king h6 The white king moving to h6 comes just in the nick of time. And if black captures on g7, then these exchanges go well for white. Okay. Still stubborn defense. Queen g8 check. Rook takes g8. Rook takes g8. And it's important just more or less to keep the king while seconds are ticking down here for white away from the h-pawn. I bring my rook all the way back to g1 to help with that. And then I had some pre-moves planned. So my opponent's black king got closer. I said, let's not let this be lost to the folly of a move like king f2, and then if I move my pawn, but then the king captures on g1, and I'll still promote. But I won't have enough time afterwards to win a victory against timeout. So better things time-wise is to keep this rook here for a little while. But then here we go, rook to g7, and we see structurally that after king to h8, the pawn's path to promotion is completely direct and unaltered and unassailable too. The king can't walk into this square controlling that white's g7 rook is laying down on the chessboard. And so from here, it's get it in before buzzer. My opponent resigns, and it's a fantastic game of chess. I was really glad for this game. Had a lot of fun playing the game. Had a lot of fun offering my thoughts and explaining what I could of the game. Very exciting game. And that there's indications that it was well played from an accuracy standpoint. All right, that's it for now, my friends. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you, Gravitrons. I'm More Gravity. Let's play chess. And I just said that wrong. Have a great night.